Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of UBS Road to the Election and Election Watch series. Now, over the past weekend, President Joe Biden, after weeks of speculation, did decide to leave the presidential race in his bid for a second term. Now the question is, will Vice President Kamala Harris get the official nomination? Well, we're going to talk about that and more with my guest, Tom McLaughlin, Senior Fixed Income Strategist and co-lead of Election Watch. Tom, it's really nice to have you join the show. I know we got you here at the last minute. You've literally been up for pretty much 24 hours since the news broke. And just for our viewers to understand, we are recording this on Monday afternoon, so it's been a little over 24 hours since the news of President Biden leaving the race. So let me start with you on this question, Tom. We know that this has certainly thrown a wrench into both parties' presidential election campaigns. Certainly for the Democrats, we have to now pivot to see who the nominee will be. And for the Republicans, they kind of have to throw out the playbook and create a new one, depending on who the nominee is actually going to be. So we know this is not unprecedented. Other sitting presidents have decided not to run for a second term, but this one is unprecedented. Talk about that with us.
Well, it's unprecedented when it comes to the timing, certainly. The last time we had a president withdraw this late in the session was LBJ, 1968. Some of our viewers will remember that. But what was interesting about that is LBJ withdrew after the New Hampshire primary, so much earlier in the process. He had lost 20 of the 24 delegates at that time that were coming out of the New Hampshire primary to Eugene McCarthy. And it was kind of pretty much of a political explosion that McCarthy had taken the majority of the delegates. So shortly thereafter, Johnson decided to not seek the nomination. But that was much earlier in the process, as I said. I think in this case, we're looking at a president who really did have every intention to take this through to the election. And then over the course of the last 2.5 weeks since that abysmal performance in the debate, he decided that he had to withdraw and leave the field open for his vice president.
Right. And certainly we're not strangers to the news flow. We did see a lot of members of the Democratic Party calling for him to resign. Then he got COVID, and then, it just seemed that it almost felt like his hands might have been tied, but it seems like he did it at the right time, certainly not waiting any longer. So you and the Chief Investment Office did publish an alert, a CIO alert, last night, as a matter of fact, suggesting that Kamala Harris is best positioned to receive the nomination, most likely the nominee. And at this point, as we're sitting here, Tom, over 100 Democratic congressional leaders have endorsed her, including Nancy Pelosi. But let's talk about how that dynamic has developed and what's still happening right now.
Yeah, what's remarkable is the speed with which the vice president has actually consolidated the race in her favor. She was going to be the person with the commanding position to get the nomination once the president had withdrawn, for a number of reasons. One of which is the campaign cash, which she and the president control jointly under Federal Election Commission rules. So it would have been much more challenging for somebody else to come in and then take control of that campaign money in order to run the election through Election Day in November. So that gave her kind of a leg up. The fact that she was endorsed by President Biden as he withdrew was another factor. And I think there's also an element that the Democratic Party knows how late in the process this is. Now, there are some voices in the party that are suggesting we should actually have, still some sort of a contest at the convention to an exchange of ideas to determine who would basically bring forth the best policy platform against former President Trump. Frankly, I think at this point we're 4:15 Eastern Time Monday. At this juncture, she's pretty much sewn it up, and within days we will be calling her the presumptive nominee, I'm sure.
Yes, exactly. And also, just to kind of give a little bit even more context to that, within the first, I think it was roughly 18 hours, she did receive about $60 million in campaign contributions from small donors, which I think is incredible. I mean, we're talking about $25, $100 per person. It seems like there's a lot of support behind her from, I guess, a lot of people were emotional yesterday on both sides of the aisle. So interesting to see. Now, I guess the next question here that I'm sure you're getting a lot, I'm hearing it, is what now has to happen at the Democratic convention that's happening starting on August 19th. We need the delegates to vote. Clearly, there's some differences between what Republicans would be required to do in this case versus the Democrats. Talk about that with us, Tom.
Well, at the convention, the nominee has to get 1,976 votes from delegates on the floor. as the roll call proceeds. Um, that would not seem to be too much of a challenge right now for the vice president. But what perhaps is just as interesting is the possibility of a virtual roll call that may occur as soon as next week. The background is kind of interesting on this one. You have to remember that the state governments actually operate our elections here in the United States, and therefore the federal government has to basically follow each of the states' own rules regarding names on ballots. And in Ohio, the original rule was that for this cycle was that the name of the Democratic nominee and the Republican nominee had to be on the ballot by the beginning of August. And of course, the Democratic convention is scheduled for later in August. And this created a problem, which is the original reason why we're talking about a potential for a virtual roll call vote in order to satisfy the Ohio statute. Now, the Ohio statute was revised, and they basically postponed the deadline beyond the Democratic convention. But the law that amended the original statute doesn't take effect until the end of August, the 1st of September. So there's still this question out there for the Democratic National Committee. Do you still want to go ahead and do a virtual roll call vote in order to basically just be extra certain that everything is buttoned down for the Ohio ballot? So the Democratic Committee, National Committee, may decide to go ahead and have that. Again, the Rules Committee is going to convene this week, and we should know by the end of the week whether or not we will have a virtual roll call vote. But the difference, the other aspect of this is that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party run their conventions a little bit differently. In the Republican Party, now we've had the convention, so we actually have a nominee and former President Trump. But the rule was that the delegates were bound to vote for the individual to whom they were elected in the primaries. In the Democratic Party, it was something more than being encouraged to vote. Um, you had to basically reflect the sentiments of the individuals who voted for you as a delegate to the convention, but you weren't quite bound to the candidate to the same degree you were in the Republican Party. Effectively, what this means is that the president need not go ahead and formally release the delegates to vote for whomever they want to vote for. Presumably, in most cases, I would expect that to be the vice president at the Democratic National Convention. But the takeaway, I guess, is that having publicly withdrawn, Biden doesn't need to take any extra steps.
Right. So, I mean, essentially, it seems like Biden's endorsement could potentially sway or influence the voters that are there with the members, but it's not a directive. So that being said, is it possible that I mean, anything is possible, right, Tom, especially in politics these days,
Yeah.
but could we see a contested convention, and how do you think that would play out?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We haven't seen we had a contested convention in the Democratic Party back in the 50s. In a more recent kind of, you want to call it the modern era, we had not so much a contested convention, but we saw Reagan challenging Ford in 1976. We saw Kennedy challenging Carter in 1980. Both of those challenges occurred at the respective conventions. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that somebody could challenge at the convention. But given what's happened over the course of the last 24 hours and what I expect to happen over the course of the next 24 hours, I would think that probably is not as likely. Now, there are still some voices in the Democratic Party who want some sort of a robust discussion about what the policy platform is going to basically include. But given the surge in campaign cash, given the fact that you have so many endorsements to the vice president, I think we're probably well on our way to being a fait accompli when we convene in Chicago.
Great. So let's move on to the next. I think the biggest other question that's happening right now as we speak is about if Kamala Harris does secure the nomination, she will obviously need to choose her own vice presidential candidate for her campaign. So who do you think they will be? Because there's a lot of speculation being floated about there about specific governors from like Pennsylvania, Kentucky, North Carolina, battleground states.
Sure.
And when does that have to happen, that she has to have a VP candidate that she announces?
There is no specific rule as to when. Different candidates have chosen their vice president made their vice presidential selection at various points. George H.W. Bush waited until the last minute at the convention. Donald Trump waited until just recently, waited until the first day of the convention to nominate Senator Vance. We have seen situations, and Reagan, again, going back even further, actually chose H.W. Bush pretty late in the process, right before the convention. So You had Hillary Clinton doing it 5 or 6 days before the convention when she chose Tim Kaine, senator from Virginia, to be her running mate in 2016. All of them out is the answer. I should have probably just led with that. So there aren't any specific rules. In terms of who she might choose, I think there are four leading candidates. There's Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania, there's Governor Beshear of Kentucky, there's Governor Cooper of North Carolina, and there's Senator Kelly of Arizona. I think any of those would probably, I think those four probably are commanding the most attention right now. Governor Shapiro, obviously in the swing state of Pennsylvania, Senator Kelly in the swing state of Arizona. By all reports, Senator Kelly and the vice president have a good working relationship from their time in the Senate. Um, Governor Cooper is termed out and is not running for re-election in North Carolina. North Carolina is technically a swing state, but Trump, basically, the former president, is so far ahead in the Tar Heel state that it's going to be difficult to really bring that back to make it truly competitive. But Governor Cooper is still in the mix as well.
Right. I imagine that right now, as we speak, there are dozens of people in a room strategizing every move of the next couple of days and weeks of this and who that particular person should be. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, and those are the top names that the press is talking about as well. So I'm imagining we'll all be having to wait on pins and needles to see who that person's going to be. So
And
here's
it may take, yeah, and
yeah,
it may take a while too, Anthony. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not sure she's going to be in a position to go ahead and make that selection in the next week or so.
Right, exactly, right. And as you said, we've the other ones picked all over the map. Great. So let's talk about this then, Tom. Obviously, this one is now, we can use the word unprecedented. We can say this time it's different. If those expressions are always overused, but it seems like they are very fitting. So give us a little bit of background on how a presidential race develops from around this time. We're talking about convention season, midsummer, until Election Day. And clearly, this one is going to change the rules, not the rules, but change the direction a little bit based on what's happening.
Yeah, it will. The net unfavorability ratings, if you want to call it that, because she's still net negative, Harris is still net negative on favorability ratings, but she's not quite as net negative as the president. So when we reset the table in terms of what we have to follow now for the next 3.5 months, we start fresh. And there's another aspect of this that's important to remember, which is that presidential races tend to basically can shift around a lot beginning right after Labor Day. Now, in this case, it may actually start shifting around in August. But just a couple of examples are worth reminding our viewers. First, in 1988, Governor Dukakis of Massachusetts was running ahead of then Vice President H.W. Bush in July by 17 points. And the general sense in 1988 was this was Dukakis's race to lose, and he did. He lost by 8. So in the course of 4 months, you saw this massive 25 point shift, really remarkable. And part of that was because H.W. Bush had a very effective campaign. But it's happened in other instances as well. You saw it when George W. Bush, the younger, was running against John Kerry, who was a senator from Massachusetts at the time. Kerry was ahead of George W. Bush in July, but still lost the election by 2 points in November. And George W. Bush, of course, was reelected. So we see instances where you can basically, just from the point of midsummer to the point in November, things do change. Now, since then, the one caveat there is that we actually have instances now, greater instances, more instances of early voting, voting by mail, early voting, and as a consequence, the nature of politics has begun to evolve. So I would expect to see some of this crystallize a little faster, a little quicker than it has done, 20 years ago and 40 years ago. But it's worth remembering that when we reset the table as we have right now, with a fresh Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate who is still in a commanding position between now and November, this race could get a little closer.
Yeah, and as you've talked about with me and other, our clients and our advisors, you always can't look at the polling as, as rule and law, because as we knew in 2016, Hillary Clinton was polling ahead of Donald Trump at the time, and obviously it turned the other way. So clearly, yes, there's information there that's valuable, but don't rely on the polling as the end-all, be-all of results. So let me finish it up with you on this question, Tom. What can we now expect from Vice President Harris as now she hits the campaign trail as the presumptive nominee? Do you think that she's going to follow the script that was written by President Biden while he was running, obviously prior to his dropping out? Or, what does it look like as far as policies that she may be talking about that maybe Biden wasn't?
Well, I think the answer to that, I think, is generally yes. There is not going to be radical departures from what would have been the Biden campaign themes. I think she's in a position where she can basically go to a couple of specific issues, such as reproductive rights, very hard, and basically make the case that the Republican Party is on one end of that subject and topic, and it's a very contentious topic, and the Democratic Party is on the other one. So I think you would expect her to say a very, very firm campaign pitch in that direction. She's also, from her time representing the state of California in the Senate and her time as AG, Attorney General in California, she has very strong ties to the tech community in California, much more so than Biden ever did. So there is probably perhaps some little bit of daylight between them in this instance, where she may not necessarily be as overtly critical, or maybe critical is not the right word, but rigid in terms of how they're going to look at M&A and regulatory policy in the tech community. Now, we don't know that for certain, but historically, she again has been a little bit more open, and she's had a lot of political support during her career from the tech community. So that would be one area to take a very close look at over the course of the next, and how she basically approaches that issue of AI generation, and how she's approaching social media, where I think this is what people will be looking for over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and to excite those younger voters who didn't seem so excited as of about 48 hours ago. So, Tom, thank you very much. And as we keep saying, history is literally being made every single day in this election cycle, and particularly today. Tom McLaughlin, thanks for being here. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Anthony.
Thanks, Tom. And with the news flow happening as it is, I'm sure we might see you again pretty soon. And thank you all for joining us, everybody. There's a lot more information on the site and a lot of written pieces from Tom and the rest of the CIO team, particularly on the election. The website, of course, is ubs.com/election watch. Plus, there are other episodes in this series, Road to the Election, that are on that site. So if you missed any, you can go back and watch some of the previous content. And of course, if you'd like to continue this conversation, make sure that you are reaching out to your financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great day, everybody. We'll stay on top of the news and bring it to you. See you soon.